Hey guys, Tyler here, and this is the Garage Warrior Podcast, and I'm super excited today to have with me Peter Osborne, Dr. Peter Osborne from the Gluten-Free Society. How's it going today, Peter?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Tyler?
I'm always doing good. You know that, brother. Well, so Peter is a gluten-free expert. I mean, one of the sharpest guys in the world on this topic. And we're going to talk today about everything gluten-free. And when you guys leave this call, hopefully you'll be well educated on why you should avoid the dangers of gluten. So Peter, for people who don't really know your background, can you lead us in to how you became this gluten-free expert?
Yeah, sure. I actually started, I'm a chiropractor, but I'm also a board-certified clinical nutritionist. And I did a big stint of my training at the VA hospital in Houston, Texas, in the rheumatology department. And in rheumatology, the treatment is very, very, I could say it's sad at best. These people get put on anti-cancer medications, they get put on non-steroidal and steroidal anti-inflammatories. And basically, they die about 20 years faster than the average person, and their quality of life is miserable. They go through multiple joint replacement surgeries. It's just a horrible, horrible disease or style of disease to be stricken with. And so in rheumatology, for those of you who don't know what that is, it's like autoimmune disease. So rheumatoid arthritis and lupus and fibromyalgia and dermatomyositis. These are just very common types of autoimmune disease that affect the joints primarily. And so basically, I tried to institute more of a nutritional protocol there, and I really was met with well, I wasn't met with the best of.
They weren't opening their arms to your ideas.
Yeah, not much at all. So, again, it was an issue of mainstream versus alternative, and not that the mainstream could offer any hope for these individuals beyond a little bit of pain relief temporarily. And so what I found when I was working there was there were really three known in the medical literature. There were three known things that could put autoimmune disease symptoms into remission. One of them was not eating. And so to me, that's the biggest scientific clue, right? It's like no-brainer. If you don't eat and you feel better, then maybe it's something in the food that you're eating that's contributing to the disease, right?
Right.
The other component that I found was high levels of omega-3 fatty acids could resolve a lot of the painful issues these individuals were having. And then the third piece of the puzzle was actually with gluten sensitivity. In essence, gluten exposure could actually contribute to autoimmune disease. So when I kind of took this information, and I wasn't allowed to apply it there in the hospital, so what I ended up doing was quitting and going and starting my own practice and instituting these same protocols. And one of my very first patients was a young boy. He had terminal juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. In other words, he only had 6 months to live. The doctors told him to go home, told his parents to prepare for his death. It was such a bad scenario. The Make-A-Wish Foundation actually granted him his wish. And he had a permanent stent in his arm. He was in and out of the hospital on a very frequent basis. And it wasn't until we identified gluten sensitivity and able to take him gluten-free that he actually made a full recovery. And that was over 10 years ago.
Wow.
Today he's off of all of his medications. And obviously he's no longer terminal. And he's doing great. He's in high school band. And he's living a good quality life. So from terminal to healthy living, all based on just changes in food. And that was really my first, I guess you could say, home run experience with diet manipulation, altering somebody's life to the point where they were dying and now they're not.
Wow, that's so powerful. And I've seen this happen in my own life. I was doing the healthy vegetarian vegan route, or so they say, right? In the past, right. And my wife, she just kept getting sicker and sicker. And they were talking about all this crazy stuff they want to do, put a colostomy bag, remove some of her colon. And we removed wheat, went to a functional medicine doctor. She started eating meat and vegetables. And now she's fine. And she can get away with some gluten exposure now. It's not going to knock her on her socks like it was before. But then it was just killing her. It was completely killing her. So that's a really powerful story. Thanks for sharing that with us. So now you meet with clients constantly. You still have a very successful practice. You're working with people one-on-one. And that's so important as a healthcare practitioner to stay connected. Is that what you're currently doing right now, Peter?
Yeah, in my clinic and just outside of Houston, we're pretty solidly booked up for about 3 months out. And so I see patients on a day-to-day basis, Monday through Friday. And then in addition to that, I have a foundation that we started. It's glutenfreesociety.org. And what this foundation's purpose is to educate people about gluten and also to educate doctors about the proper diagnosis and the proper recognition of gluten sensitivity.
Absolutely. Okay, well, let's take it way back and then we'll build up from there. So let's say somebody's listening to this call and they're like, well, I heard about this gluten thing, but I'm not sure what it is. It's all the hype these days, gluten-free. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what gluten is, how it can affect you in a negative way, and why people might want to consider at least trying taking it out of their diet for a 30-day or whatever period you recommend.
Well, so gluten is actually not one term. It's not a singular term. When we say gluten, we're actually referring to thousands of different proteins. And these proteins are conglomerated and found in grains. So when we talk about grains, the grains are the seeds of grass. So we have this family of proteins called glutens found within the seeds of grass. And what we have found with these particular proteins is that their primary job in the grain is to protect and preserve the actual germ of the grain so that it can grow and make new grass, right? Pretty important job in Mother Nature's grand scheme is preservation of the species. So what happens when humans eat gluten as a staple food in their diet, these glutens have the ability to rip and tear holes in our gut lining. And this, you may have heard of the term leaky gut before. This is one of the notorious things that gluten is noted for causing. And once you've established a leaky gut, your body starts to react to all kinds of foods. You start to develop allergies to all different types of foods. And so over time, the accumulation of persistent gluten exposure just leads to a systematic breakdown in one's gut. And those proteins now can leak into the bloodstream and start wreaking inflammation and other forms of havoc and causing autoimmune disease in virtually any tissue in the body. So it can be quite serious. It is a trend. I mean, you know, diets come and go. Trends come and go. Atkins was a trend. South Beach was a trend. But there's a little bit of validity to all these trends as they come and go, because people follow trends because it works for them, right? And not one diet works perfectly well for everyone. But as it relates to gluten, I would just encourage all of your listeners, if they're having persistent joint pain, if they're having persistent disease, persistent fatigue, gastrointestinal bloating, abdominal distension, pain, abnormal bowel movements, and they're young, especially if they're younger, you shouldn't be having any of these types of symptoms as a young person. And even really more so as an older person, you shouldn't really be having them either. But if you're having those things and they're unexplainable and the doctor's just trying to medicate them, then you really need to potentially look at gluten as one of the origins or one of the causes to the origin of that problem.
Right. And so one of the things that kind of bugs me is when people hear, you know, a gluten-free or an Atkins or a paleo, whenever somebody's removing something from their diet, everybody wants to protest. You're always going to have those protesters, right? So what always bugs me is that people who are protesting have never tried it, right? So what do you generally recommend people do? Do they try it for a week and then come back? They try it for 14 days? What's like a general guideline you see works well for most people to see that positive influence from not having gluten in their diet?
Well, for most people, they're going to see a difference within a couple of months. Now, there are exceptions to that rule. Sometimes it can take much longer. For the severely sick individuals, I don't recommend playing with the gluten-free diet. If you're really sick, you really need to get it determined whether or not it's something you need to do, and you really need to stick to it 100%. But if you're just trying to determine whether or not taking gluten out of the diet might improve your energy levels, you know, if you're not super ill and you want to play around with it, I would say at least do it for 60 days. You're not going to see the negative consequence of reintroducing gluten back in the diet if you shortchange it. In other words, if you have it out of your diet for 60 days and then you get hit with a large dose of gluten, you're most likely going to be keen enough to recognize the detriment that stuff is doing to your body.
Okay, I gotcha. And so, you know, for people who don't know what are gluten-containing foods, I know this is a pretty big list in the gluten-free society world, but do you have a good resource we can point them to, or just, you know, the most common foods that contain gluten that we want them to avoid?
Yeah, I'll actually, I'll send you over a link, and it's got a list of all of the known forms of gluten and all the hidden sources of gluten and all its forms and names. Because there are hundreds of things you got to look for.
Awesome. Yeah, I know there's quite a lot of things with gluten hidden in there. That kind of brings me to the next topic is gluten-free is kind of a popular trend. It's definitely getting more and more popular each and every month or each and every year. So what's your take on gluten-free foods? You know, you go to Whole Foods and you see gluten-free foods.